what's going to happen when robots can do art better than humans? LOL. Like, well, we'll see in 20 years, and 20 years, and 20 years. And now you have AI art winning competitions. And it's funny because robots are essentially
There's a robot behind you, by the way.
a robot behind me. Oh, nice. Robots are really good.
Careful what you say.
Yeah, I'll be careful. That's not like one of the Chinese ones with a gun on it, right? Oh, okay. Hopefully not.
We'll see depending on what you say. Yeah.
Okay. Robots are really good at showing the limitations of the human mind in categories that we didn't believe we were limited before. Like, I think that humans have this idea intrinsically that we have like some type of like innovative, creative drive that is just outside of the bounds of physical understanding. And with a sophisticated enough program, we see that maybe that's not actually true. And that's a really scary thing philosophically to deal with, because we feel like we're very special, right? We own the planet, we make computers, and the idea that you can start to get these robots that can do things that's like, okay, you can do math, fine. Okay, you can do calculations, fine. But you can't do art. That's the human stuff. Mm-hmm. And then when they start to do that, it's like, oh, shoot.
And that terrifies you a little bit? Like the human species losing control of our dominance over this earth?
I don't think it's necessarily losing control of our dominance. I mean, I guess like a Skynet thing could come in at some point, but I think it brings us to this really fundamental level of like, what does it mean to be human? What is it that we're good at? What should we be doing with technology? We never really asked that question in the Western world. It's always the technology is like normative in that technology equals good and more technology equals better. That's been like the default assumption. In fact, if you ask a lot of people, how do you know if civilization has progressed over the past 100 or 200 years? They don't say we have better relationships, we have longer marriages, we blah, blah, blah. They'll say technology has improved. We've got crazy phones, we've got crazy computers. And the idea that more technology might be bad has never even crossed somebody's mind, unless it's used for like a really bad thing. So,
well, it's interesting. We kind of think as more and more automation is happening, we're going to get more and more meaning from things like being artists and doing creative pursuits. And here's like, oh shit, if the creative pursuits are also being automated, then what are we going to gain meaning from? What are the activities from which we'll gain meaning? You know, my whole life I've been working on artificial intelligence systems. There's been different revolutions. One of them is the machine learning revolution. And it's interesting to build up intuition and destroy that intuition about what is and isn't solvable by machines. I think for the longest time, I grew up thinking Go is not, the game of Go is not solvable. Because my understanding of AI systems is ultimately that it's fundamentally a search mechanism that is fundamentally going to be brute force. There's no shortcuts.
Sure. Like if it can't solve the traveling salesman problem, it's not even going to be able to give you an approximation.
So most interesting problems are a giant travel salesman problem, and then so of course it's not going to be able to solve that. Yeah. And then the deep learning revolution made you realize, holy shit, these large neural networks with a giant number of knobs is able to actually somehow estimate functions that can do a pretty good job of understanding deep representation of a thing, whether that's a game of Go or whether it's the human natural language, or if it's images and video or audio and even actions in different video games and actions of robotics and so on. And then you realize with diffusion models and different generative models, you start to realize, holy shit, it can actually generate not just interesting representations or interesting manifestations of the representations it forms, but it's able to do something that impresses humans in its creativity. It's beautiful in the way we think of art is beautiful. Like it surprises us and makes us chuckle and makes us sit back in awe and all those kinds of things. And yet the thing that it seems to struggle with the most is the physical world currently. So that's counterintuitive. We humans think that it's pretty trivial, the being able to pick up a cup, being able to like write with a pen, like in the physical space. We think that's trivial. We give ourselves respect for being great artists and great mathematicians and all that kind of stuff. And that seems to be much easier than the physical space.
Our bodies are really cool.
Yeah.
There is I don't know, It's probably Asimov or something. There was some science fiction writer that it had a short story, and it was like an alien that had landed on Earth, and it was describing our bodies from a totally alien perspective. And when you think about all the things we can do, it's pretty cool. We can, climb through a whole multitude of environments. We can exist in a multitude of temperatures. We can manipulate things. Just with our hands and the way that we can interact with things around us. And yeah, we're very capable on like a physical level, even though, like you said, we think about ourselves like, oh, well, human beings have really big brains, and we do. We're really intelligent as well. But yeah, our bodies are pretty cool too.
And it's a fascinating hierarchical biological system. Like that we're made up of a bunch of different like living organisms that all don't know about the big picture of our body. And it's all functioning its own little local world and it's doing its thing. But together it has it forms a super resilient system. All of that comes from a very compressed encoding of what makes a human. You start with the DNA and it builds up from a single cell to a giant organism. I mean, and because of the DNA, through the evolution process, you can constantly create new humans and new living organisms that adapt to the environment. Like that resilience to the physical world, it seems like running the whole Earth over again, the whole evolutionary process over again, is might be the only way to do it. So to create a robot that actually adapts, is as resilient to the dynamic world, might be a really difficult problem.
Possibly. Well, I was going to say, like in a programming environment, you can do things on timescales that are impossible in the real world, right? Like the benefit to AI and computers is computationally, they can compute so much data so quickly. Whereas on human timetables, we have to wait. When you talk about evolution, it's generation after generation after generation. Maybe in a virtual environment that could be simulated, and then those changes could happen a lot quicker.
Well, that's not a human timescale, but you have to look at Earth as a quantum mechanical system. The computation is happening super fast. This is a giant computer doing a giant simulation. So just because for us humans it's slow, there's like trillions of organisms involved in you, Destiny, being you.
Sure. But the next iteration of like from human to human, even if on the quantum level, there's a lot of stuff going on. You talk about like changes in DNA, for instance, right? Like that's happening from a generation to generation time scale. Like in a virtual environment, that could theoretically happen. Well, it already is. There's like protein folding, like huge cloud computing, probably ML stuff that's like working on doing all of that stuff. And it'll run like trillions and trillions of simulations, every second and stuff. Maybe not every second, but
still slower than the actual protein folding, much slower. That's for the problem of solving protein folding, to estimate the 3D structure, but the actual body does the actual protein folding way faster. So like the question is, can we shortcut the simulation of human evolution, try to figure out how to build up an organism without simulating all the details? Because we have to simulate all the details of biology, we're screwed. We don't have...
Oh, true. We'd have to put something in a pond and then watch it for
that might be the most efficient way to do it.
Sure.
That's what the universe most likely is. It's a kind of simulation created by a teenager in their basement to try to see what happens. It's a computer game. That might be the most efficient way to create interesting organisms. But within the system, it's perhaps possible to create other robots that will be of use and will entertain us in the way that other humans entertain us. And that's a really interesting, of course, problem. But it's surprising how difficult it has been to create systems that operate in the physical world and operate in that physical world in a way that's safe to humans and interesting to humans. Because there's also the human factor, the human robot interaction. To me, that's like the most interesting problem, to figure out how to do that well. And so Elon Musk and others, Boston Dynamics, have worked on legged robots. So I really care about legged robots. Those are super interesting. How to make them such that they're able to operate successfully in a dynamic environment. It's super tricky. They're like the dumbest of dogs. Speaking of which, there's a dog barking outside.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really tricky to create those kinds of organisms that live in the human world. Then again, if more and more of us move into the digital world, so you stream a lot, like part of who you are exists in the digital space. The fact that you have a physical representation also, maybe more and more will become not important.
I
Like,
hope that's the case because I bought a lot of stock in Meta, and man, it's down a
oh,
lot.
Meta the company.
Yeah.
Is there some degree like can you look at yourself like Steven the physical meat vehicle,
Mhm.
and then the Destiny, this digital space, like digital avatar? Do you sense that in a certain way you're the digital avatar?
I've always tried to keep my on-stream personality as genuine as possible. So they're one and the same to me. I don't really view them as two separate entities. So, but I mean, I always view myself as Steven, the real life person. My Destiny's my online name, but
No, but because so many your social network is established through the digital space, like so many people know you through the digital space. Can we swap out another person that looks like you in like an AI system, and then that entity known as Destiny will continue existing? It's
I
like
mean, it must be like there must be some level of sophistication that could emulate a human brain. I would imagine, right? Probably the tech's not there yet, but
well, the question is, what's the level of sophistication of the audience that would recognize that something has changed? Like, it's the Turing test.
yeah.
How hard is it to trick your audience, your large audience of fans that watch your streams, that when you swap out an AI that emulates you, that nothing has changed? And the question is, do you have to really simulate so much of the human brain for that? I don't think so.
Probably not.
And so, I mean, like you said, a lot of political discourse is just walking down the tree
Mhm.
together. So you can
Yeah.
probably emulate a lot of that discussion.
Yeah, it would depend on if you're doing old data sets and you're training on that. And I'm having conversations about abortion and Ukraine and vaccines. I imagine it could do it for quite a while. The only thing that would be weird is when novel issues pop up. Then you probably need a more sophisticated resemblance of the inner brain, right?
You have to keep training on the internet. So how the language models, and that's the most incredible breakthroughs, is the language models.
Mhm.
You just have to keep retraining the system on Reddit, which
Yeah.
is actually what a lot of it is trained on, which is hilarious.
I do think it's really interesting that like kind of like funny problems like the trolley problem that we can kind of work through our normative ethical systems on are now like real questions. Or like if you're driving a Tesla and it's on autopilot and you're going to hit somebody, but it can swerve and hit somebody else, like what ought the system do? Like we went very quickly from fun kind of like project in philosophy class to we need to solve this for insurance purposes like as quickly as possible. It's kind of interesting to think about.